Priya Basil was born in London to a family with Indian roots and grew up in Kenya. In 2002, she moved to Berlin, where she still lives. She has published 2 novels and a novella, as well as numerous essays for various publications, including The Guardian. Her fiction has been nominated for the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, the Dylan Thomas Prize, and the International Dublin Literary Award. She is also the co-founder of Authors for Peace, a political platform for writers and artists established in 2010. Moderator Elissa Altman is the critically acclaimed author of Poor Man's Feast, a love story of comfort, desire, and the art of simple cooking, and the James Beard Award-winning narrative blog of the same name. Trafe, My Life as an Unorthodox Outlaw, and most recently Motherland, a memoir of love, loathing, and longing. Her work has appeared in O, the Oprah magazine, the Wall Street Journal, On Being, The Guardian, The New York Times, and The Washington Post, where her column Feeding My Mother ran for a year. A finalist for the 2020 Lambda Literary Award, Elissa teaches the craft of memoir and has appeared live on stage at TEDx and the public, on Heritage Radio, and on NPR. I'm so pleased to have them here together in conversation. And now Priya and Elissa.
Hi.
Hello, everyone. It's lovely to be here. And Priya, it's such an honor to be in conversation with you. And this is kind of an odd thing. I see that there are 24 participants here, and I am in gallery view. I can't see them. I don't know if you can see them, Priya.
No, I can't. Just imagine this community around us, which is a wonderful feeling.
It is indeed. And I was saying to Priya earlier that her book is so extraordinary that I've been sort of clinging to it right now and underlining and underscoring, and it's just been the most thought-provoking volume on issues of generosity and community and what that means, especially now in the world that we're living in. And I don't know, Priya, if you would like to begin by reading and speaking to everyone.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here today. I really appreciate this invitation and this possibility to join you all at such a tense and decisive moment. And yeah, it really feels like the honor is actually mine to take your time and your thoughts towards my own book and my own reflections. Be my guest. This is actually the first book of mine that's published in the US as well, so that's a very special moment too, I must say. And I think it says so much about the country, just that a book like this, in a moment, where a president like Trump is sort of causing so much anxiety, this sort of marks, in a way, so much of what this country is and how I've always understood it. Like many places, a place of many contradictions and tremendous generosity, in the sense that so much is possible. And I would love to read a bit to you. I might just read a little bit from the very, very beginning, because that captures something of the way that I think through things in this book. So I just read the first paragraph in a couple of sentences. We begin as guests, every single one of us, helpless little creatures whose every need must be attended to, who for a long time can give nothing back, or very little, yet who, in the usual run of things, nevertheless insinuate ourselves deep into the lives of our carers and take up permanent residence in their hearts. Our early dependence is indulged in the expectation that we, in turn, will become dependable. Maybe reaching adulthood really means learning to be more host than guest, to take care more than, or at least as much as, to be taken care of. when I was researching for this book, one of the things that I found, which became a real leitmotif for me, was that in English, the root of the word hospitality is an Indo-European word, gosti, which meant host, guest, and stranger simultaneously. And this was such a sort of profound insight, and because I think it captures something of the way that we live and are throughout our lives, that we somehow move through these three roles consciously or unconsciously. And for me, this sort of trio of roles, it became a very productive and very interesting way to think about our relationships to each other.
Thank you so much for that. I actually have that underlined and printed out on a card. It was something that I had never known, and we do always move between those three places, and I have found myself also, thinking about the roles of generosity, and certainly as it's tied to culture and custom, but also a bit about the juxtaposition between the feeder and the fed, and what that means. I recently found myself in a conversation with another writer, talking about issues of forgiveness and who it benefits, the forgiver or the transgressor. And in reading the book, it struck me, there's a similar concept surrounding generosity. And I have always thought, and I think it's a particularly Americanized sensibility about generosity. You come to my table and I will feed you and you will be grateful. And it's certainly not always that way, nor should it. So can you speak a little bit about the juxtaposition between feeder and fed, and does feeding always benefit the hungry?
Mm. Yeah, well, in my family, which is, I guess, in a way, this book started from that, the role of cooking and feeding, and particularly my grandmother, Mumji, was one that
I love her, by the way.
she is a real character. It was very much tied to power, and there was this real sense of sort of being, her cooking way more than was necessary, putting pressure on people to eat much more than they wanted. And of course, this is done with a kind of great kind of energy and great bounty always on her table. But there was also a sense in which I felt a bit oppressed also by this, because she needed us to eat and appreciate. That was what she felt made her feel good. And I think this idea of giving and taking, and how much, like, in what we give, what we expect back too. And I, scientifically, it's proven that in terms of our neurons and the way we respond chemically, that actually giving is much more stimulating and rewarding than receiving. And I reflect in the book about how, for me, one of the things I had to sort of confront and admit to myself when I was writing this book was that how often I give with the expectation of something, of getting something back. And of course, I think reciprocity is a very important notion, and there should be an equilibrium of relations, and it's not about exploiting or sort of also doing too much and feeling resentful that you don't get anything back. But one of the notions that I was very attracted to in thinking about hospitality and generosity is the way that the philosopher Jacques Derrida conceives of it, which is this idea of unconditional hospitality. And he concedes immediately that this is impossible. He says the only possibility of the thing is the experience of the impossibility. And it sounds like a riddle, but I think that we experience that impossibility all the time in our lives. I mean, if we think about situations that we forgive, which we thought we would never be able to forgive things that we managed to do, which we thought ourselves incapable of. I mean, if you think of this pandemic situation in particular, the impossible possible is something that daily is playing in small ways in our lives. And so I do think that in our personal relations, we tread this boundary between the possible and impossible all the time, and that is what the hospitality of love is, in a way. And so for me, the question was, how do we apply that in a wider sense towards others and towards our own sense of the world, to maintain that kind of openness, that willingness to just go that little bit further, to open up that little bit more. And it's a huge challenge. It's a tremendous ask. And I must confess, I write about this and I advocate for it, and I take it as an orientation for myself, but I don't really feel it all up to the task. I fail at it all the time. But for me, in a time where the currents of xenophobia and racism and nationalism have been growing ever stronger, and where the idea of who belongs and who's part of us is, for so many people, or for so many parts of the society, becoming narrower and narrower, I really wanted to work with a vision of something that was radically open, and to have that as part of our conversation and part of our imagination too. And because I think that idea of excluding people nonstop is also an impossible one, and just the price of it is a different price. It's a much higher price in a way, because I think we pay with our own kind of humanity and integrity and dignity. And so for me, this impossible of trying to be unconditional, trying to remain open, was the more attractive and productive and hopeful one.
It seems to me now, to that point, that, as you say, the ability to put oneself in the place of another is at the heart of hospitality. And but it can also oblige us to be courteous against our will, which is a fabulous. I mean, I had to wrap my brain around that. But you write about this in light of, and I hope that this is okay to speak about some of your family members voting for Brexit. And can you talk a little bit about that, and how that conversation for you impacts your thinking about, for example, the refugee community, and how does it it seems to be, we suffer from such cognitive dissonance in this country, where it's all about bringing people to the table and nurturing them and sustaining them, but not if they're the other. And that's something and that sense of otherness, especially right now, as we are heading into a national holiday of Thanksgiving for some and not for others. It is steeped in cognitive dissonance. Can you talk a little bit about how your own sense of hospitality has changed or been altered by the differences, the different views of people close to you who might be voting in a way that might be surprising?
Yeah, I think that the idea that there's an element of discomfort in practicing hospitality is something that I began to grapple with in writing this book and in thinking about different experiences in relation to each other. Because of course there is this one aspect of hospitality where you choose who comes and you set the terms, and it's sort of like you get to practice it in a very particular way that you can feel very good about yourself too. And that's very nice, of course, in a small round, having people to dinner, deciding who comes, what the menu is, and that's a real pleasure that I think it's wonderful that we can practice that, and that should always be. But there are these other domains of life in which we can't always set the terms, and yet we maybe have an idea of how we want to behave towards others or how we ought to, and to be in a situation where you don't want something and yet you still want to be or a certain kind of person, a welcoming person. That I think is the sort of the tension that that I was really interested in, and I experienced that myself with people that I knew, members of my family. We had similarly, well, a parallel polarizing situation in the UK with this vote to leave the European Union, and talking to people who had chosen that and felt that was the right thing. Actually, it took me a few times of doing it to realize that I wasn't actually talking to them, that I somehow immediately got into this mode of sort of, I don't know, wanting to say, but no, but this, and arguing and trying to persuade and change minds. And they were always really not very nice meetings. And I could tell this happened 2 or 3 times, like let's say every 6 or 7 months. And only after the 3rd time did I realize that I was somehow really, I was so closed up, because on the one hand, I was telling myself, I really want to understand how people would make such a decision. Like, what is their understanding of the world? And then each time I had a chance, I couldn't really sit it out. I wasn't really patient enough. I just started to react immediately and get very emotional and feel as though I had to defend my ground. And this idea that hospitality it can be an imposition, and that you don't get to choose and you don't get to change somebody's mind. But of course, these are people I could nevertheless live with. I mean, they're very nice people in certain ways, and that I couldn't find another way around to be with them and to just find some sort of understanding was really disappointing to me. And I don't think one can make those kind of accommodations with everybody. Of course, I think there are certain positions and certain attitudes that I could not say anything about, and I wouldn't want to be in the same room with. But I think between that extreme of extreme of prejudice and racism and hate that can be expressed by people, and the many people who are sort of navigating ground that's in between and maybe defending certain priorities and protecting themselves in certain ways, I think there must be a way that we can speak to each other. And I haven't been the most successful at that.
Nor have
I do think, though, that eating together is actually one way to diffuse some of that sort of tension that can come up between people, and some of that discomfort, because it's something that you're sharing. The senses are being spoken to differently. You get into a slightly different mood. There's a sort of intimacy, a physical intimacy in eating together too, that I think makes us a bit more vulnerable, to kind of, to see somebody eating, and, to be close to them and to be smelling the same things. And also, of course, when you eat certain foods, you also smell different. Like, so you, like, if you eat a curry, you're all going to be smelling a bit different. And so there are these kind of very physical and intimate ways in which food does things to us, regardless of what we're thinking and what differences we have, which can be very powerful if we're sensitive and alert to them. And so I haven't met those relatives of mine now since I had my realization that I was not being very generous. But I had promised myself that next time I did, I really wouldn't try to argue with them, but just listen and see if that got us anywhere else.
Yeah, that's so fascinating, and I love the point about food is primal, and the act of eating is primal. It is the great leveler. And actually, that brings me to this question, that you are a Sikh who grew up in Kenya and England, and you now live in Germany. Can you speak about how these vastly different cultures and cultures within cultures result in challenges for you in their contrasting views of hospitality and generosity?
Yeah, so my family, the family I grew up in was Sikh. I later became an atheist in my teens.
As one does.
Yeah, now I would say that I'm agnostic. And what was very interesting to me, I mean, I talked about Jacques Derrida earlier and the idea of unconditional hospitality. And I had actually encountered that as a child in the Sikh temple, because in Sikhism, there's this tradition of the langar, which means community kitchen. And basically anybody can volunteer to cook in a Sikh kitchen and serve this food. And then there is apparently an open invitation that anybody can come into the temple and partake of a meal. And when I learned about this, I was so astonished, because I grew up in this very segregated society. I mean, Kenya became independent. It was part of the British Empire, and it gained its independence in 1963. And I was born in 1977. And so this is kind of a country that is freshly out of that colonial rule, but is still very much shaped by that time. And so in my family, we're part of the Indian community, and we don't have any Black friends and no white friends. There was very little mixing between different groups of people. And at the temple, this idea that anybody could come in was just so astonishing to me, because that wasn't how I understood the world. I understood it as a very divided place. And then the thought struck me, but if anybody can, how come we're all just, Indian Sikhs here? How does that work? So how do you know about the open invitation? Who is it extended to? Because if you went outside the gate of the temple, there were so many Black Kenyans there, and nobody ever came in. And so this discrepancy between the ideal of a community and the practice was there. And I guess I didn't have the kind of faculties to really grapple with it or question it. I was not a very questioning child. I mean, things struck me, but I didn't really articulate them. And when I started to write, I guess that became my way of speaking about these things. And as I was writing the book and then thinking about Derrida and connecting these notions of hospitality, I thought about the European Union, in which I live now, because I live in Germany, which is still part of it, and the same ideal of openness and welcome for all that it purports. And of course, we have 27 countries with open borders, at least before COVID, and this possibility for people to really move and share a space in a very unique way, which I think in the history of the contemporary world, that there isn't another project like that. But of course, this welcome is just for those who are already here. And if you look outside Europe, Fortress Europe, the way in which those outer borders are being policed, the way we let migrants drown on the way here, the way we refuse to accept refugees and migrants in many countries around Europe. All these things show the hypocrisy of these values. And so I think the interesting thing for me with moving between these different cultures is to see how in every society, I think we all love to think of ourselves as being really hospitable. And I think we all are when we can choose who's coming. But the true measure of a society's greatness, I think, is how it treats its minorities and weakest members, and how it treats the uninvited stranger, the migrant. And on that measure, the societies that we have considered to be like the most mature democracies, or having the strongest welfare states, or they are failing right now and have been failing for a really long time. And I guess as somebody who always moved quite easily and had the privilege of a British passport, which gave me access to so many places, this question of, why is that possible for some and not for others? It's pure luck in a way. I mean, you could say, well, my family is a result of colonial history. My grandparents went from India to Kenya during the British Empire, and when Kenya became independent, they had my grandfather had a chance to go to the UK and get citizenship. So they might have earned that in a certain respect because of the exploitation that they had at the hands of the British. But I just was born into this. And so then the question was, well, what do you do with unearned privilege? And for me, one answer was to try not to decide in advance who else gets to share in those privileges. But to this unconditional hospitality idea, to remain as open as possible to the possibility of others coming and also having access to that and giving back in whatever way they can. Because I think nobody wants to just take. I think we all really want to also give and reciprocate. And when you can do that on your own terms and in your own time, I think that people always, I really do believe that people enrich the places and the societies they join, yes, if they're given the opportunity and they have the equal treatment.
Even in the best cases, we come to this with preconceived ideas of who belongs and who doesn't. And I remember there's a Pasteur quote that I'm sure I will mangle about you come here, I do not see you by your nation. You are a human being, and if you need help, I will give you help, and your home will be my home. And that's something that that we would all be able to live that way. And I am often very concerned about the myths that we tell, the myth making, the nationalist myth making, which is very loud right now, and that impacts who we have at our table, our proverbial table, our actual table, and not. And certainly at this particular time. I'm going to pivot a little bit and ask you something that's a more actually culinary related, food related. And you talk, and I am forever fascinated about the decisions that people make surrounding what they eat and how they eat and why they eat what they eat. Getting all of the various messages and information and conflicting information and disinformation. Disinformation is not, not just about the elections. Disinformation is also about what we eat, how the planet is responding to the decisions that we make about the table, and issues of privilege and lack. You talk about becoming a vegetarian, and worrying not only about what to eat, but what to serve to guests. And I was telling Pierce earlier that I'm a child of the 70s when vegetarian food was beige and everything about it was beige and bland, and we were supposed to love it. And we couldn't love it because it was beige and bland. And then you would try and serve that to your guests, and they would be less than interested in it. And in America, we are forever, and I assume also the UK, I studied for a little bit at Cambridge, and I found this to be true there also. In America, we are forever running up against the question of what goes in the middle of the plate. Okay. And that to me is, it's a metaphor. I mean, it's a symbol. What goes in the big piece of meat that goes in the middle of the plate, that where the roast would be, what do you do? How do you serve people, at the holidays? And it is a cultural and culinary conundrum. And you speak brilliantly in the book about the things that you could do on the vegetarian table, but that you still worry about, and that you're still concerned about. And I have noticed that my plates have gotten smaller and smaller and smaller as I'm really thinking about what I'm eating and the choices that I'm making and the way they impact not only my home and my health, but the world around me. Can you talk a little bit about this and what some of your experiences have been surrounding it? Because I know that Germany is a very I love German food. Germany loves meat. I mean, they I have been through the whole sausage realm in Germany, and it's wonderful. But I'm very curious.
Yeah. Well, that's the very interesting thing when you try to think about being hospitable in a sustainable and reasonable way. It kind of almost doesn't fit with the idea of hospitality as we understand it, or as we maybe want to feel it, which is a situation in which you get more than you need, in which there is abundance, in which you feel, totally indulged. I mean, this is so key to our understanding of being hospitable, to give more than is required. And so this kind of shift to thinking about how can I be hospitable in a way that is also, is also hospitable to the planet, to animals and to plants. It's really challenging, and I haven't figured that out because I'm really in the tradition of my grandmother. Much as I suffered from her her way of doing things, I'm also this kind of over the top, much more than you can possibly have kind of cook. And sometimes, my friends come and they're like, oh, have you got 10 more people coming? And then by the time they go, almost everything is finished. And then sometimes they say, oh my goodness, we had so much. And, of course, that makes you really proud as the host. There's nothing better than people taking seconds and thirds and wanting recipes. But nevertheless, there is, of course, a consciousness of how overindulged we are in certain ways. And I guess during this pandemic time, we've all cooked less for others simply because we can't have people over. And so I feel like this impulse to reduce has been imposed. And I don't know how it will be when I can have people over for dinner again. I sort of feel like I just want to be, kind of extra over the top to celebrate that it's possible. And yet I always say to myself, if you made one thing less, I mean, would it make a difference? And it wouldn't. So I've told myself that's what I'm going to practice, like just doing one thing less, and just to be mindful of how fortunate we are and what we can manage. But I think there is a contradiction at the heart of trying to be hospitable and reduce, and at the same time to give the feeling of tremendous abundance and generosity and care. And maybe it is a question of our perception too, because what you say about my feeling of, vegetarian food initially, not anymore, not being enough, it's because of the social values and the role that, certain ingredients play in our imagination and our idea of status and what is valuable. And I think those things can change. So this is the sense in which I find hospitality very interesting to think of as a practice, as something that you as an exercise you do, because that way to change things, to shift things seems much more manageable than in a broader sense. But it strikes me now, maybe I would just read a short passage just to give a sense of the sound of the book and one of the stories where food plays a critical role and gives a sense of also how food has this duality to it in many instances. Food can divide as much as connect. Even where a group is relatively homogeneous, difference can suddenly sizzle like water splashed on a hot griddle. I saw this in my father's annoyance that our Muslim friends didn't eat any meat dishes at our house because they rightly assumed it wasn't halal. That's it! We're not inviting them again! He would rage as my mother put away excess leftovers of chicken which the guests hadn't touched. Who do they think they are? I don't want to see them anymore. Do you hear me? Never! Quick to anger, my father also calmed down pretty fast. Next time we were on the way to visit Muslim friends, he'd swear that he wouldn't have any meat they served because he knew it would be halal. By the time we were around their table, his misgivings would have disappeared and he'd tuck into whatever was on offer, extending compliments and having seconds. Years later, after my family moved briefly to London, my parents themselves sometimes bought meat from a halal butcher in Tooting. What was the alternative when certain dishes like lamb palau or samosas turned out much better made with the less fatty meat, which just happened to be halal? There's nothing like desire, whatever its object, to help us forget our compunctions. Food can make some of us compulsive and thus push us past certain limits of propriety, of decency, of sanity. Whenever this happens to me, my husband says I get the look, a tense, hunted, frenzied expression that announces greed has taken all sense hostage. Often at pains to appear polite and decent, I have consigned manners to oblivion and chased canapé trays at parties, helping myself to handfuls at a time. Normally eager to avoid the cold at all costs, I have pulled on coat and boots and headed out into the midnight snow to buy a packet of crisps. Generally disposed to honesty, I have lied that there are no leftovers, only to secretly scoff them all myself. I never understood the restraint practiced by believers whose faith imposed food restrictions. How could they resist? My dad may have forgotten his grudges in the face of an aromatic lamb dish, but there were deeper differences that he could not dismiss. Some distinctions, it seems, won't be bridged. Some borders won't be crossed, no matter how many meals are shared, no matter how many foreign delicacies consumed. That's why, though some of their closest friends were Muslim, some of their dearest in-laws white, my parents warned that my sister and I should never become romantically attached to a Muslim or a Black person or a white, in that order. Of course, there was no logical explanation for this racist rule. The best my parents could manage was that it was against our religion. Looking back, I think we saw ourselves as victims and therefore somehow absolved from any duty to others, however much worse their plight. On our tables, there was plenty, but our minds were impoverished, our imaginations limited. We prided ourselves on our hospitality, but had little sense of just how far the act could stretch, and in the stretching, who it might enable us to become.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Pierce, are you here?
I'm here.
Do we have more time to chat? Shall we move into Q&A? I mean, I have one more question for Priya that I would love to end with.
Oh, okay. So we have one question, but it's a good one, and I think it'll have a little bit of conversation. And then we'll end with your question, Elissa.
Okay.
I'm also enjoying your kitten very much.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
No, it's lovely.
I'm so sorry. I've like my door is too far away for me to reach to let the kitten in, or
Absolutely lovely.
He's perpetually on the wrong side of the door. So.
Oh no, that's a very sad image.
Okay, so this is a lovely question from Sarah. What are some foods or food traditions that you love sharing with family and friends? How are you recreating or adjusting these this year, Priya?
Oh, that is a really good question. Mm-hmm. I actually to make things easier for myself, I just cook the same stuff really often for people. So there's some dishes that I just know work really well. And so my ritual is just to spare myself, also because I need to be over the top. So I can't be kind of really then novel each time as well. So I just roll out this repertoire of things that I can manage quite well. But obviously, since that hasn't been possible, what I have done is I have baked and posted things to my mother-in-law and my mum, and I have baked things and left them outside friends' places. And one recipe which I have found to be very durable for posting and for lasting for many weeks are these Ottolenghi almond pistachio and sour cherry cookies. I make them with cranberries, but they're really easy to make. They last for ages and every single person loves them. And so this has been a wonderful way to touch people and to kind of get close to them at a time when it wasn't possible. I didn't realize, I mean, it took me a while to discover that these would be good to post. Before that, I was sending my mum nuts and dried fruit. And it's not that she couldn't get these, but I just wanted to have sent something that I had touched and that she would hold and like would go close to her and be in her body. And I think this is something that food offers us at this moment. I mean, I know people who've met to cook online and then eat the same thing, and this way of being connected through ingredients, through a process that is happening physically, in time, I think can be very profound and connecting. So yeah, there may be some possibilities there.
That's wonderful. I think we have another question from Amy.
Oh, it just came in. Lovely. So Amy asks, how have you been cultivating community in this strange and distant time?
Well, there's been a lot of online meetings. I'm part, for example, of a feminist circle of women, and we normally we meet once a month, and there are many of us who are part of this, but there's normally about 20 of us who would meet, and we instead took to meeting online. And it's interesting because fewer people come, so there's maybe 6 or 7 people, but I don't know all of them, but this very intense exchanges. And so this idea of somehow just keeping the channels open to whoever can join in has been really beautiful, because unexpected connections with people, you have constellations in which you would never have imagined meeting outside in a restaurant or something, but suddenly online, a different kind of possibility opens up. So for all the critiques that we may have of the digital realm, and those are really valid and necessary, I think that there have been also tremendous possibilities to be with each other, as now, in fact, through this medium. Walks have become a real ritual and a real way of being with 1 or 2 people at a time, usually just one. And I think that I think there's a different intensity in our exchanges now, because, well, for different reasons. I think we're kind of all a bit more raw, just because the circumstances have worked on us, or we're weary, or just feeling things very intensely. And so the time that you can be with someone always feels really precious, somebody who you're not living with, and those moments you take to be with somebody else outside your home, I feel like they have a different charge. And so just the community of 2 seems to me also to be very precious, that what we can do for each other in very small constellations, and to have many of those. I mean, I'm very fortunate that I also live near some people that I can meet regularly. I do think it's tremendously hard time for people who are more isolated, or places where they just can't get out, and there maybe digital meetings can make a difference, but I think not all of us sort of respond to that so easily. And I mean, my mother, for example, lives alone, and she doesn't have so many people immediately around. So I know it's been a very, very lonely time for her. And I know that there are people in even worse and more difficult situations. So I don't think that the things that I say will apply to everyone at all. And I'm so conscious that there's so many people we can't reach, and for whom this is just a really, really challenging and painful time. And that's also a hard thing to live with, to feel helpless in I guess we could donate. I mean, that there are always sort of charities and organizations who are also working to reach people. So maybe that's one way of trying to reach further than what we're limited to physically. But yeah, it's a really important question. And I think the idea of community is one that this time really forces us to interrogate, because we can't get through this alone. And this idea of who we can join with, to who we can ally with, to support ourselves emotionally, but also as a world community. I mean, if you think about, you know, the idea of now this vaccination coming, but who will get it, and unless everybody has access, unless things are kind of equally distributed, and this situation starts to get better the world over, you know, it doesn't feel right somehow to celebrate, even though, of course, it's a wonderful advance and really necessary, and to start alleviating some pain is better than not to alleviate any. But I feel very conscious of the inequalities and differences and distances between us that have grown because of this. And so I guess decisions we take now also affect the sense in which we can be a community at different levels, the small and the macro.
Lovely. That's all of the questions. Thank you so much for those, Amy and Sarah. And Elissa?
I had two final questions, and one is sort of a larger question, and the last is very personal. The first is, how would you advise us to think about hospitality and generosity at a time in our history that is so very divisive? Where sitting down with someone you don't necessarily know is often seen as a great risk. So that is the first question. And then the second question is, what do you do at the table to nurture and be hospitable to yourself when nobody's there?
Let me answer that one first, because
Okay.
it's yeah, in a way. I love to listen to podcasts and to listen to those while I cook. And by the way, when I'm on my own and when I'm working, I'm really happy eating the same thing every day, which without any fuss. So I love making my own hummus. We had a little discussion about hummus, Elissa. We both have a lot of hummus stories. So hummus and avocado on toast is like my favorite go-to meal, while listening to a really good podcast. That's kind of what I really enjoy. And the other question, it's such a difficult one and such an essential one. And I really think that the way our willingness to look at history and to consider how much we know or don't know, and what we're prepared to do with, or how we're prepared to answer for the way we react to what we don't know when it comes into view. That for me seems to be really at the heart of how we might find a way back towards each other and towards forming like a more understanding and more responsible way of being with each other. And I mean, for me, this understanding of history as being critical came very late. I mean, I grew up in different places, but very much formed by the British sort of sensibility and idea of the past, which is quite glorified. I mean, there was never learned anything about British colonial history. And, you know, in the UK, anyhow, I think there's a majority who feel that the empire was a force for good. And so coming to Germany and living in a city which is full of memorials, to the victims of the Holocaust and the Nazi imperial project, really alerted me to the fact that how come I didn't come from a place where it was important to remember, and to think about how we are today in relation to how we were, and to have the sense of being guided by the past in a certain respect. I mean, Germany also has gaps in its memory culture. It has another colonial history in Africa and Namibia, where there was a genocide too. So it's certainly not perfect, but it was the beginning of my sense of how looking to the past can be a really powerful orientation, and that without that, if there's not enough of that retrospection and introspection, then we miss certain ways of understanding our connections to each other. And when we don't understand how we're connected and how we are beholden to each other in deep ways, then our obligation also to act, I think, is reduced. And so that generosity of, I think, opening to history and understanding ourselves in this broader time frame, in this broader view, which means looking at understanding our relations to other part of the world, seems to me a very valuable way to approach each other and our worlds right now.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was really such a pleasure to be with you. And I'm so sorry that I can't see all of you who joined us, but it was really lovely to know that there are many people with us and thinking and feeling with us.
Yeah, thank you both so much. This has been really brilliant, really needed. Certainly made me feel better. And I just want to give a quick shout out. We have another event tomorrow. It's called Immigrant Writing in a Time of Crisis. It's at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. For anyone who wants to join us, you can find the link on our website. Thank you all. Thank you, Priya. Thank you, Elissa. Thank you, everyone who attended.
Thank you so much, Priya.
Thank you.
Priya. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. It was really a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.